This presentation is about the Toulmin method. The objective of presentation is to help you understand what is Toulmin method and what are its applications. So to understand what is Toulmin method, let's have a look at its definition. Toulmin method is a way to respond analytically to an argument. So basically, when you read an argument, you do not just agree or disagree with that argument. Rather, you give a solid reason for your agreement or disagreement. So, through the Toulmin method, you learn how to break an argument into its parts. And parts of an argument are claim, reasons, and evidence. Let's have a look at how the Toulmin method works and what are the parts of an argument. So the Toulmin method works by helping us identifying the parts of an argument. The first part of the argument is a claim. So what is a claim? Claim is most general statement or umbrella statement in an argument. It is a thesis statement, so to say, in an argument. Or in other words, claim is a statement in an argument in which the author gives their own position related to a particular issue. However, when writers write a claim, they use various qualifiers. These are the examples of qualifiers: some, most, many, in general, usually. Here is example of a claim where a qualifier has been used. Many books by Charles Dickens are fun to read. I'm sure you can immediately understand how a claim should look like. So this statement, many books by Charles Dickens are fun to read, this statement is a position that an author has taken. Of course, the author needs some reasons to support this claim, but we will discuss the reasons later. Right now, I want to invite your attention to this qualifier many. So this qualifier many has a very important role to play over here. What is the role of this qualifier over here? This qualifier makes the claim strong, or it makes the claim easy to defend. How so? Let's compare it with another claim which is unqualified, which is a claim in which no qualifier has been used. Read the second claim, please. Books by Charles Dickens are fun to read. So notice over here, if an author has this claim, books by Charles Dickens are fun to read, that would mean all the books that Charles Dickens ever wrote are fun to read. Now, any reader who wants to criticize this claim will definitely come up with one or two books from all of the books that Charles Dickens has written, one or two books in which the reader might not have found much fun. Or in other words, a reader can definitely find out or point out one or two books by Charles Dickens which are not much fun to read. And therefore, a reader can easily destroy this claim by an author if the claim has been written in this manner. On the other hand, the first claim, many books by Charles Dickens are fun to read, you might notice that it is a stronger claim. Why? Because if anybody wants to argue against it, or if anybody wants to destroy that claim, and if anybody wants to point out one or two books which are not fun to read, then uh, the claim itself already has pointed out that it's not all the books by Charles Dickens which are fun to read, but many books by Charles Dickens are fun to read. So the claim is already uh, making this qualification that it's not that 100% all the books are by Charles Dickens are fun to read, rather many of them are. Okay, now it is very hard to argue against this claim because the writer has already taken care of the possible objection to his claim. Of course, the possible objection could be that, well, one book by Charles Dickens is not fun to read, or two of them are not fun to read, or three of them are not fun to read. So the writer, therefore, is very clever in putting a qualifier in this particular claim, saying that many books by Charles Dickens are fun to read. That is why, see at the bottom of this slide, where I write unqualified claims are hard to defend. Okay, you cannot defend, it is very difficult to defend a claim without any qualifier, but qualifiers make it easier to defend a claim. Another thing that we need to know about a claim is exceptions. So when a writer writes a claim in their argument or for their argument, they also make some exceptions. What does that mean? That means in their claim, they restrict the claim to certain situations. Let's read this example. Most books by Charles Dickens are fun to read, might be limited by the exception. Having labored over David Copperfield in high school, I would not rank that book among the fun books. Exceptions make it easier to defend the claim. Without exceptions, the claim appears weaker. Now, this is the writer's claim. Most books by Charles Dickens are fun to read. You will notice that already there is a qualifier in this statement. Most is a qualifier. But now on this slide, we are not talking about qualifiers. Now we are talking about exceptions. So clever writers, they put the claim in such a manner that they themselves highlight one or two exceptions to the claim that they are making. And the benefit of that is that their claim becomes stronger. Now, here is a claim with an exception in it. Having labored over David Copperfield in high school, I is the writer, I would not rank that book among the fun books. Now, in this second case, what the writer has done is the writer has added an exception to the primary claim that the writer made. So the primary claim was that most books by Charles Dickens are fun to read, and then right after this sentence, the writer added another sentence in order to make an exception. In the second sentence, after the first sentence, the writer says, having labored over David Copperfield. Now, please remember that David Copperfield is a novel by Charles Dickens. It is a book by Charles Dickens. So, the writer says that having worked hard in understanding David Copperfield in high school, that means the writer read this novel when he was in high school and he had to work hard in order to understand it. So, having worked hard on the book in high school, now from his experience, he can say that I would not rank that book among the fun books. So, by making this exception to his claim, that means by pointing out something which already falls outside the applicability of the writer's claim, something which already falls outside the writer's claim, the writer has himself pointed it out. Instead of waiting for the readers to point out any exception of that kind, the writer has taken care of this exception himself or herself. So when you read a claim by a writer, you must notice if the writer has put the claim with a qualifier or without a qualifier. If it is without a qualifier, then it is easier for you to point out the limitations or the weakness in that claim. Similarly, if you read a claim written by by a writer, and you should notice if the writer has pointed out any exceptions to that claim. If the writer has not made any exceptions, then you can immediately point out, well, this writer says that all the books by Charles Dickens are fun to read, but actually that is not the case. There is a book A, book B, book C. People have read that, other students have read that, and they have found those books to be totally boring. All right. So far we have understood that the first part of an argument is claim, and the claims have qualifiers and exceptions. We determine the strength of a claim on the basis of this fact whether the writer has used valid qualifiers or valid exceptions in their claims or not. Now, the second part of a claim is the reasons. In this part, the writers support the claim that they make. So, for example, we read the claim in previous slide, most books by Charles Dickens are fun to read. Now, it is not enough for a writer to make a claim of this kind. Rather, the writer must give strong reasons to support their claim. So, the reasons are the first line of development of an argument. So, when you develop an argument, or when somebody develops an argument, this is how they develop the argument. That is, they first give a claim and then they give reasons to support that claim. So, of course, it is quite obvious without reasons, a claim cannot be effective. Now, something more to learn about reasons. When you read out the reasons given by an author to support their argument, you should notice two things. Number one, is the reason or are the reasons given relevant to the claim? That is the first thing. And the second thing is, are the reasons given by the author effective enough? Let's understand this part in more detail. As far as the relevance of a reason is concerned, that is obvious. You know, you can make a very intelligent determination whether the reason which has been given, it really supports that claim or not. So we don't need to discuss that point of relevance much. But of course, effectiveness. How to determine whether a reason is effective or not. Now, effectiveness of reason is determined by the value the reason invokes. What does that mean? Let's look at this example. Suppose this is a claim by an author. The claim is argumentation is an important skill to learn. And this is the reason that the author gives to support that claim. The reason is no other type of writing requires a great deal of thought. Now, this reason is not an effective reason. Why? Because what this reason is pointing out does not add any value to anybody's life. Let's read another example to understand it better. Now, same claim, argumentation is an important skill to learn. Same claim can have another reason. Let's read another reason. This reason says that most of the writing assignments in various disciplines of a university are in some way related to argument. This is an example of an effective reason. Why this is an effective reason? Because when you read this reason in support of the writer's claim, you realize that this reason is pointing out a value which is being added to the reader's life, the writer's life, or to anybody's life in general. How so? Look at this example once again, which I have highlighted. Most of the writing assignments in various disciplines of a university are in some way related to argument. So that means that argumentation is an important skill to learn in a university, because in various disciplines of a university, the students need to write many assignments, and those assignments require argumentation. Students are required to use argumentation in those assignments. So if they know how to write arguments, they will be able to attempt those assignments, and thereby they will be able to pass their courses with good grades. So that is the value which is being added to people's life, or to the lives of the students, or to the lives of the writer. So a reason seems to be effective to us only when the reason is pointing out some real benefit of the claim which is being made. So you need to notice, when you read a reason, does the reason actually invoke any value? If it does, then that reason is an effective reason. Now, as opposed to this example, if we once again look back on this example, no other type of writing requires a great deal of thought. Now, this reason, what does it say? It says argumentation is an important skill because no other type of writing requires a great deal of thought. So what? If argumentation requires a lot of thinking, so what? That is no reason for argumentation to be an important skill, that it requires a lot of thought. So probably if it requires a lot of thought, then argumentation probably is a useless skill to learn, because it only requires thought and thought and thought, nothing else. So this reason is not pointing out the real benefit of the argumentation as a skill. All right. So when you look at the reason which is provided uh, by a writer to support a claim, please look at two things. One, is the reason relevant? That will be obvious. Of course, you can read the reason and see if the reason in fact has connection with the claim which has been made. And the second thing you need to see is if the reason is effective. Okay, and you can determine the effectiveness of a reason by reading it and by determining whether the reason invokes any value which the reason adds to anybody's life. Now, the last part of an argument is the evidence. So, when the writer makes a claim in argumentative piece of writing, the writer gives reasons to support their claim, and finally, the writers give evidence to support their claim. What is an evidence? Evidence is facts, examples, statistics, or experts' testimony about the claim that the writer has made. Now, to be believable and convincing, the evidence should be sufficient, credible, accurate. So the evidence that the writer provides should have those three elements in it. Let's look at them one by one. The first one is that evidence should be sufficient. What does that mean? Sufficiency of an evidence means that most of the writing assignments in various disciplines of a university are in some way related to an argument. Now, in this particular sentence, the evidence is broad enough to become acceptable. Let's look at this statement again. Most of the writing assignments in various disciplines of a university are in some way related to argument. So the reason that the writer is giving to support his claim or her claim, that reason takes into account various disciplines of a university. Now, for example, if the writer says that most of the writing assignments in English department of a university are in some way related to argument, that is why argumentation should be considered an important skill to learn, then that evidence will be a weak evidence. Why? Because in that case, the evidence is depending only on one department of the university out of 30, 40 departments. So the evidence that the writer gives should be sufficient to support the reason. Then evidence should be credible. In some cases, a writer might have personal experience and the evidence might be based upon that personal experience. If that is the case, then evidence will be a credible evidence, or an evidence comes from a source which is credible. For example, a published magazine, an academic article, or a research paper, or a published book. So look for credibility of evidence. The evidence that the writer is giving, is that really credible? And finally, evidence should be accurate. By accuracy of an evidence, we mean that the statistics and facts that the writer is giving to us, they should be verifiable. So for example, if the writer has given a link to a source, you should be able to check from that link if the facts which the writer has stated are those facts actually the same as the author has produced. Now, if the writer does not provide any source of those facts, then you cannot verify them, and therefore you can always doubt the accuracy of those facts. Similarly, the quotations that the writer gives, they should be complete and they should not be used out of context. So when you read an evidence being produced in an argument, you should look for whether the evidence is sufficient, that is, it is broad enough, and then whether the evidence is credible. Has it been taken from an authentic source? And then finally, is the evidence accurate? Can you verify it as a reader? If you cannot, you have all the reason to point out that this evidence is a weak evidence. Now we come to the final part of this presentation, which is related to objections and rebuttal. Now sometimes when the writers write an argument, they anticipate what the readers will object about or what the readers will criticize in their argument. So the writers give answers to those questions which will be raised by the readers when they would read their article in the future. So the writers anticipate the objections to the reasons they give to support their claim. So what do they do is the writers state the objections and then offer the rebuttal for that. Rebuttal is a kind of counter response. Okay, so what you should do as a reader is you should watch for the effectiveness of a rebuttal. A rebuttal should have sufficient and accurate evidence. So don't be pressurized by the rebuttal that the writer is giving in his or her own argument. So the writer might guess, okay, uh, the reader might have this kind of objection to this argument. So they would state, okay, some readers might assume or might see that there is a certain limitation in their argument, and uh, then those writers will provide a response to that question even before that question is raised by the reader themselves. So they will state that probable question which will be raised by the reader, or that probable objection which will be raised by the reader. They state that objection, and then they offer a rebuttal or answer to that objection at the same time. You, as the reader, should read that rebuttal very carefully, and you should see if the rebuttal has if the rebuttal is effective. So rebuttal is once again a kind of evidence that the writer is providing. So you should look for the fact whether the rebuttal has sufficient and accurate evidence in it. If it does not, then point out that even if the writer has anticipated the possible objections and the writer has provided rebuttal to those objections as well, still I would like to point out that those rebuttals do not carry effective, sufficient, accurate evidence. So in sum, what we have learned today, students, through this presentation is this, that when we read an argument written by an author, we should not take that argument on its face value. Rather, we should try to critically analyze that particular argument. In order to analyze an argument, one of the methods that we use is called the Toulmin method. So Toulmin method basically is a way to respond analytically to the arguments written by an author. So when you use the Toulmin method, you break the argument into its parts. The parts of an argument are claim, the first one, reason, the second one, evidence, the third one. For claim, you should see if the claim has a valid qualifier and valid exceptions. For, for the reason, you should see if the reasons are uh, effective enough. And finally, for the evidence, once again, you should see if the evidence is reliable, if it is accurate, and if it is credible. And finally, watch for the rebuttals that the authors give for the anticipated questions. And you should check if those rebuttals are reliable and do they have sufficient and accurate evidence in it. So this is the presentation about the Toulmin method.